The incredible life of the prophet David, who fearlessly confronted the giant ruler Goliath. David's interesting life began when he was a young boy, from the Ark of the Covenant carried by angels to the waters of the mysterious river. There are so many details you need to hear in this story, where mountains and stones speak and animals begin to speak. Let's start with the amazing journey of the prophet David, the father of Solomon, and of the most powerful kings in the world. About 300 years ago, in Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, the birthplace of Jesus, a child was born, one of Jesse's 13 sons. He was none other than David, which in Hebrew means the most beloved. The apple of the eye was indeed, as his name means, different from the rest of the children in the family, because his father David had sensed something different about him when he was still a child. David was born into a poor family of shepherds, and his childhood was surrounded by animals and nature. One of David's remarkable characteristics was his voice. God had given David such a voice that birds and other animals would gather around him when they heard his voice. Even the mountains and the stones would join him with their voices when he was glorifying God. They would chant God with him. God says in the Bible, "We gave the mountains at his command, and they glorified their Creator morning and evening. And we gave the birds at his command, and they all followed God." Another miraculous attribute given to David by God was his ability to bend and melt iron. This ability, which no one else had, enabled David to shape iron into the shape he wanted, and he would later be able to make many different weapons. And now we come to one of the most remarkable events of David's life. On his way to becoming first king of his country, and then a prophet, it was a great moment in David's young life. He would have an important battle that would lead to him being recognized by everyone, and eventually even becoming king. He faced off against the giant warrior Goliath, and it was one of the most memorable events in history. It all begins with Goliath, the ruler of a tribe located between Egypt and Damascus, who became the scourge of the Israelites. The most striking detail about this ruler is his appearance. Ancient sources describe him as a giant ruler, while many researchers today bring up interesting clues that giants lived in the past. Whether Goliath was one of these giants is a matter of debate. The general consensus is that he was about 3 meters tall. This warrior ruler, who made a name for himself by his huge size, disliked the Israelites and plundered their cities. He captured their women and children and smuggled them back to his own country, and defeated the Israelites and made them miserable. But Goliath didn't stop there. He finally took the sacred Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites, and to make them even madder, he desecrated the priceless Ark of the Covenant. When the Israelites heard this, they were very angry. The Jews, who were skeptical of Saul, because he was not a descendant of a ruler at that time, said, "Let Saul prove himself to us, and let us be convinced that he is capable of leadership." They asked Saul to take back the Ark of the Covenant from this giant ruler. So the angels took the Ark of the Covenant from Goliath's hand and carried it and placed it at Saul's door. When the Ark of the Covenant suddenly appeared on Saul's doorstep, the Israelites accepted Saul as their leader and set out with an army of 880 Idro's men under his leadership, because now the Jews had the Ark. It had miraculously come back to them. God's help would be with them, and they would rebel against Goliath's rule and get rid of this evil ruler with the Ark. They were in a very high state of morale. They set their sights on the land where Goliath's people lived under the leadership of Saul. They planned to fight against the giant Goliath and take back their prisoners, their women and children, and their valuables. But the army was not yet aware of the unimagined, inable thing that would happen to them on this journey. On their way to fight Goliath, they came across a river on the way. God was going to test them with this river. When they reached it, they were warned that no one should drink from it, and that those who were too thirsty to endure should be content with a handful of water. This had already been told to the Israelites by a prophet. So Saul warned his whole army and reminded everyone of what he had heard about the river But most of the 880 0 men of the Israelite army ignored this divine message from their leader Saul. Only about 4,000 of them did not touch the water in the river, while most of the rest of the army drank from the river as if they had not been warned this water as promised. Soon left them in such a state that they didn't even have the energy to walk. They got sick and fell down on the ground. These soldiers were immediately taken out of the army when there were only about 4. 0 left Saul, and the rest of the army became nervous, and most of them gave up fighting and ran away, leaving only 313 soldiers they had to continue the journey with these 313 soldiers. Now we come to the most exciting part of it all. David was one of the 313 men left of this army of 80. 0 men. He was young, not yet a prophet, not yet a ruler. He had come into the army as a shepherd soldier, but even he had not yet discovered his soldiering skills. David, who had heard the mountains and stones chanting with him over and over again, was on his way with the rest of the army towards the giant Goliath, when another strange thing happened to him. He heard a whisper and looked in the direction of the sound, but no one was there. Then he realized that the sound was coming from 3 small stones lying on the ground just ahead of him. The stones were talking to him, and they said to David, "Take us with you. You will kill Goliath using us." David was amazed at this wonderful miracle, and he put them in his bag and went on his way. At that time there were slingshots that threw stones. It had the same effect as a bullet from a gun today. When the giant Goliath saw the Israelites with a tiny army in front of him, he could not hold back his slaughter. He said, "Did you come to me by chance?" The dusty, tense atmosphere of the battlefield echoed with the breathing of thousands of soldiers. With a booming voice had challenged the Israelites. "Who among you will stand against me?" Had called out, according to the tradition of the time. Goliath asked for an opponent to fight him before the battle. No one had the courage to stand up to this giant of a warrior. Then a humble young man dressed in ordinary clothes, so small in comparison to this giant of a man, walked out into the square. Yes, it was David, instead of the armor or the sword that an ordinary warrior would carry. He had only a slingshot and 3 stones in his pocket, with a gleam of faith in his eyes, a look of courage on his face, and a small body. David stood there, and the giant Goliath laughed out loud. Then David carefully picked up the stones in his palms. Calmly, as if born for the moment, he readied his slingshot. Then he fixed his eyes on Goliath's forehead. David eventually pulled his slingshot, a whistling sound in the air, then a hard crash, and then the noise of a huge body falling to the ground. And he hit Goliath right in the center of the forehead with a stone. The giant Goliath is sprawled on the ground with the stone in the center of his forehead. David rushed to his side, took his own sword from deep within, and ended his life. The shouts of joy of the Israelites filled the sky. His soldiers were frightened as the giant of a man fell to the ground. God put courage in the hearts of the Jews, and suddenly the battle became fierce, and the Jews won the battle after the victory. All the spoils were burned, because that was the ruling in the Torah. At the time, the story of David teaches us the power of faith, courage, and humility, that these values are the real weapons that can defeat the giant in man. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content.